player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Lunacestus Kitone review. A little bit late, but better late than never, I hope. Today's review, pretty standard stuff. Character overview, the base and total stat analysis, the report card, general thoughts. We'll walk through the whole kit. You guys know how it goes by now, but brand new dark unit added to the game. They've given her the unique main job of Ashen Lunacestus with the Knight and Nightblade subjobs. She does equip Fist as another strike unit added to the game, with hats, cloths, and accessories as a move 3, jump 2 unit, 70 cost unit added here. There is a faith recommendation of 50. Don't need to go any higher than that. Could make a case maybe lower, but don't need to overthink that. She is a relatively short range character though, only maximum range of 4 squares away. She only has 1 AoE in her kit, and that is that 4 square away ability. 3 single target scaling abilities. From a resistance standpoint, 15% equal here to slash and magic, 5% to pierce and neutral to strike with the -5% to missile. Nothing terribly crazy here. I like to see, some double digits versus some of the more popular types, but these are relatively minor at this point. I'm not worried about status elements, but she does have 50% to poison. You see that a lot. That's a nice resistance to have. 50% to berserk, certainly nice, and 10% to slow, which we are seeing an uptick in. So these are honestly not the worst status effects to have hedged against. Now for the mastery ability, they gave her permanently 10 defense pen and 30% acquired AP. She's very good in that regard, very, very handy with how she handles AP and generating it and reducing the cost of abilities, as we'll end up seeing. Now the dream ability, permanently 15% magical damage reduction the larger the AoE. This is extremely potent in terms of damage mitigation. Definitely a nice feather in her cap that only a small handful of units get access to innately in the kit like this. She does have 20% debuff weakening permanently as well. Definitely keep that in mind. Now, as we go through the base stats, overall definitely higher than I would have expected from a base HP perspective. It's not out of this world, but it's very competitive for a damage dealer, definitely above that 75th percentile. HP levels I'm overall not relatively concerned with. The base attack definitely well above average here as well, almost near that 75th percentile. She's not at the top of the charts, but she doesn't need to be, quite honestly. Base attack does have a variety of ways to end up coming to fruition when the build is fully completed. Now base agility, again, higher than most units, but not the end of the story when it comes to agility. There's going to be more passives that we'll talk about, but overall in a really good starting spot here. And base dexterity also relatively decent. She's above the highest chunk of where units tend to end up bucket wise. She's basically at the median of where units are, so neither good nor bad, but definitely a decent spot to start. And the base luck, kind of the same idea. She's relatively above average, but not crazy. She's in a pretty good central tendency when you start to bucket the units out. And so as we transition those charts to kind of look at all 5 of them relative to other UR units, honestly pretty good here. I don't really see any serious deficiencies here. When you add in the board stats, the mastery, yeah, there is some dropbacks here. The HP, they don't give her a ton of emphasis. Slight step back on the attack for what they give her for nodes. Same thing for dexterity here, where they only give her 34 dexterity. That's definitely a little bit below average. Only 8 agility, so the total agility innately, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, though. They really underserve her, though, on the board stats for what they give her for HP. Most units will pick up like another 200 HP or so typically, but again, not the end of the world. 200 HP is not making or breaking many of these characters. Now, from an agility perspective, she does have an agility passive, so you have to consider that here. She does come in at around 78 agility with no passives, bumps up to that 84 range with it, so definitely above average, all things considered, when you have that passive, which you will likely have on the majority of the time, so you can think of her as a above average agility character. The crit hit and crit avoid, crit hit, she's got a ton of crit rate nodes on her board, so she ends up at this 90% rate, which is above average compared to many, considering where her dexterity is kind of average, so neither amazing, but definitely a step ahead. The crit avoidance, I would say basically average, nothing to write home about. Both of these are in fairly decent spots. And the accuracy, this is where there's a larger conversation to be had about her accuracy. Her innate accuracy is not great. It's basically at the average mark, which is fine, but average units aren't hitting top tier evade. She does have a passive to bump her up to a higher tier of accuracy, which is a substantial amount. It's 25% accuracy, but she's still a tier below where most of your very high accurate units are. But that's not the end of the story. There's obviously more things we can do that we'll talk through soon. But keep moving along for now. Evasion, not an evade unit. Very, very poor here. Far below average for what you'd ever achieve. And as we get to the report card here, overall effective HP, I'm going with a C plus here. 6 defense, no spirit. She doesn't have any AoE or unit res innately, but she does have that 15% magic damage reduction the larger the attack size. It's hard to really quantify that in how I typically think of effective HP, and technically her weapon gives her 15% reduced physical damage, but only if the HP is above a certain threshold, so it's kind of tough to really give this a perfect grade, but I can tell you right out of the bat, this is likely a little bit lower than your average unit. Her HP, although the base level of HP is very, very nice, when you end up fully building it out, overall effective HP is C+. The resistances aren't anything crazy, so I'm leaving it at that. There's survivability also in with a C+ here. She's got a 50% physical barrier. That's cool, and can absorb 30% damage for 3 turns on her main buff. That's really it for survivability, though, so you kind of put those in conjunction with each other. There's not a whole lot going for her from that perspective. That might be, I think, one of her overall weaknesses, all things considered. Now, damage, going with a B here. The attack stat, slightly below average. The modifiers are slightly lacking. There's no 200% modifier on the main job, for instance. There's not a lot of strike modifiers. Her weapon doesn't even have strike attack on it. So there's one aspect, but the defense penetration upside is also limited. It's not impossible to build up the defense pen, but innately definitely falls behind where most characters are, and we'll talk about that soon. The agility, going to the B here. She's at that average when you consider her base, but she will have a passive equip most of the time that does put her above that average. 2 thumbs up there. The accuracy, going with a C+ here. The innate accuracy, slightly above average, no guaranteed hit. She does have a buff that will give 30% hit rate though, and her 120 also has an extra 30%, so we'll talk more soon. So the accuracy, not an accurate unit, could be an accurate unit, but it's a little difficult to really nail down a grade on, but going slightly above average for now. The evasion is a D, not an evade unit. Next, the movement, going with an A here. Jump 2, very nice. Move +1 on a passive as another option, and has a move and jump +1 buff on the sub job. Certainly a lot of options to switch up her move and jump potential. The auto ease of use, going with an A here. Really easy AI. Low bait potential because of how short range her abilities are. The imperils and dispel that she has are like some easy value to really bring to a fight to kind of get rid of some buffs and some of the trickier things you might encounter in terms of a team matchup. So I like the overall ease of use. The game disruption, though, going with a C. She's a great Fist edition. Fist is already pretty stacked, though. And I don't think there's necessarily anything in particular that she really brings to, say, like the Helena Vivi matchup or the A2 and Greatsword matchup. It's not that she's bad against those, but I don't think it's disrupting anything that doesn't already exist. Now, the passives, going with an A here. Amazing main passive. Very, very good secondary options, too. The counter abilities, going with a C here. It's a decent CT gain. The 30% damage absorbed for 1 turn, kind of hit or miss, though. It doesn't stack with her buff, so it has to be proc mid-fight. There's even questions about whether or not you actually generate that much health off it, so the CT gain is nice. The counter abilities are kind of whatever, though. The overall jobbing kit, going with a B- here. Not a particularly special kit. The utility is fair. It's really boom or bust on the value of the dispel, which is high impact. I'll give her that. But after that, it's a pretty steep drop off from what else she has to offer. She's kind of creatively done because there's a lot to do with like turn order that we'll talk about in the next slide. But overall jobbing kit doesn't really add much to the team fight, and definitely anything really like substantial to her teammates. Now the final grade, I'm going with a B here. Very solid unit, very nice addition to the Fist cast. She's going to get used, particularly for limited cost, content when you're trying to put together different kinds of Fist teams. Is she a guaranteed unit to put into your strike team of 3? I don't think so. There's a debate, but I don't think so. And even a dark team, like a mono dark team, kind of debatable whether she stands at the table there too. But she's not a bad unit. I'm going with a B here. Now for the general thoughts, really cool turn order X factor. There's a lot of things here that she's got a passive that can prevent her from getting her CT down. The counter ability when it procs will give her 100 CT. When she kills an enemy with her select 2 ability, she'll gain 200 CT per enemy killed. The teammate buff is to apply minus 15% agility on enemies upon hit, so you kind of slow down their turn order. Her AoE is a 25% agility increase for herself, so kind of get that agility disparity. Her limit break gives her haste, and she does have a sub job buff that move jump +1, it also gives 300 CT for kind of a quicker turn order. So there's a lot here that I think it's more like death by 1,000 cuts, the kind of character. And as we've seen, you can't really underestimate how good CT and turn order is. That quite often is the biggest difference in winning or losing fights. And so that's why, although it might not like wow you or be special when you look at the kit, there's something to be said for what this part of her does that is a little bit unique to her. Now, her main utility is the Select 2 Dispel, no doubt about that. If she didn't have that, this character would be very, very bad. The accuracy in this unit can be kind of all over the place, though. She does have a buff that gives her 30% accuracy. Her Vision card gives her 20% accuracy, which can be a main slot Vision card in a mono strike team, because they do have some flexibility to throw in a third main slot Vision card there. So you could get her even more accurate with that. Her 120 ability has an extra 30% hit chance. The Nightblade passive can give another 25. So all the things are there. It's whether or not you're able to actually, line them up, which makes it kind of difficult to really get a feel, though, for how you should typically build her, what levels you should build her for. So it can kind of be all over the place when you talk about what you can expect for accuracy from her. But she's definitely got the pieces there to build it up. Now, the Night buff, Divine Healing, gives a very interesting heal upside. We're going to talk about that in the job overview, but she does have some healing power, which does add another wrinkle to the survivability. The follow-up attack that she does, gain on buff is a very nice way to deal extra chip damage. We've seen that with 2P and various other characters. It's a great courage counter as well, but very, very unit attack oriented. She's got that one small cross shape AoE. The rest of her attacks, although they're select 2s, they're all unit scaling in nature, so kind of one-dimensional in that regard, and also very, very short range, which honestly isn't bad, because it means you can get that Divine Healing buff off. It means you could use a TMR. It means you could use a third buff like the Ashen Lunacestus buff, the move jump +1. So that might be a bad thing, but honestly could also be a good thing. I'm just noting it, obviously. The defense pen upside, though, is semi-limited, could use some help. She's got 40 from a passive. You could get 10 from a Truststone passive, and she's got 10 from a mastery ability. I would consider that the floor for what you should always have. Is at 60 total. Not bad, but we've seen power creep drive that higher. You obviously could go Ultros Esper for extra. You could go for the attack Truststone set, which you might be able to get away with by sacrificing some agility, since you've already seen that she's got some like CT and agility altering things. You could probably give up the 6 agility to equip that Truststone set. There are also TMR options where, again, we talk about she can be a unit who maybe uses a TMR buff. There's TMRs like Sephiroth's old one, I think Noctis's. I know there's another recent one that add defense pen. Might have been Lucio the Luminescent. That should you want to, add some defense pen, there are other ways to do it, but that is a limited upside that most characters recently have that she doesn't. But let's get into the job. There's a lot of great passives. The main one here is the top one, Striking from the Moonlit Shadows. That's the agility, the defense pen, hate -5. That's very special that every fight she starts off with that to kind of put herself at the bottom rung of prioritization. The courage, when your HP is above 70%, I actually don't like this at all. For one pure reason, I genuinely mathematically can't think of much that would one-shot this unit. None of her resistances are egregiously negative. She's going to have that 50% barrier online for physical damage. She's got the 15% magical reduction for those giant AoEs. I really can't think of much that would nuke her to kill her above 70%. So that's nice to have. I don't really see any value in that, though. The rest of these passives really pick and choose what you want to do. I prefer Nightblade Mastery just for the attack and the accuracy. I think you can't go wrong with that. But Shinobi's Creed is certainly map dependent for the extra move, and I like the AoE res option too if you want to bulk her up a little bit. We'll see that in the sample builds. For the counter abilities, these are okay. Breath of Abandon, it's the increased CT of 100. That's certainly nice. The absorb 30% damage done for one turn. It does not stack with her buff, so this is kind of more of like a mid-fight counter. It's okay. Really hard to quantify if that's a difference between anything, though. The rest of these are very average, which brings us to the main job buff set. And the main one is the teammate buff that will give her the 50% physical barrier. It also will give the decreased agility of 15% upon hit for herself and allies. The solo buff after that is the accuracy of 30% and the absorb 30% damage done for 3 turns. It also starts her follow-up attack here, which I somehow missed out in the bullets, that will restore 50 CT upon hit. So there are some other CT manipulation things going on here. Both these buffs are honestly pretty decent. I just don't think it's enough to really like get her over any kind of hump for what I think her perceived weaknesses are. And for the main job offensive abilities, there's 4 altogether. They're all strike oriented. They're all dark oriented. Again, very short range. Most of them are only 3 squares away. The AoE goes up to 4 squares. The select 2 ability here is definitely the best one. She's got a nice strike crush of 60% on that AoE. That's definitely a newer mechanic, but I don't think strike res gets up to any kind of like crazy high levels. But it's very nice to have in there that should someone like Soul be stacking a lot of strike res, decreasing it by 60% is very material in that regard. And technically with her weapon, it's a decreased AP consumption of 15%, so all her AP abilities will actually be 15% cheaper, which I have here in these parentheses. Now, you talk about the limit break. This is another select 2 up to 4 squares away, so a little bit of a longer range that will proc her haste. This is also 42 AP with that weapon equipped. This is a very good limit break for mid-fight to suddenly gain haste when most enemy haste will have been subsiding at this point. So this is very powerful in that regard. The sub job, I don't mind this one. This is a triple hit here. Obviously great for chaining some strike damage. I do like this buff too, considering the move and jump where you probably do want to get her like away from some teammates, let her, traverse the map however she wants. She's got the hate -5, so she should go relatively unattacked, hopefully that your teammates are in range and Kitone is kind of at an off angle. Those enemies will not target Kitone just because of the hate priority there. So I do like that from a positioning perspective. The Knight sub job, this one's okay. It's the Divine Healing buff, though, that's really interesting to give the 30 healing power. That will substantially increase the damage she heals back. I don't think it's a game changer, but it's a nice thing to consider that you could get her to like 50 healing power innately, which is the cap based off of this buff. The rest of this job, though, I don't like anything here for her other than that one buff. And the Nightblade sub, to me, this is only about Drain Rush, where this is another way to absorb 30% of the damage done, which I believe will stack with the buff, but it's debatable how much damage she'll do as a slash type attack. It is a triple hit. I'm not in love with it. So if I had to pick between the 3 subs, I'm probably going Nightblade for the Drain Rush just to have the option, but I'll be honest, I really like this sub job as well for this extra buff versatility and the triple hit chain. Now the TMR review, this is potentially a best in slot TMR. The 8 agility is exceptionally high. It's the highest that you can get. I love this for that purpose. The TMR skill is actually not bad either. This is great for Kitone to further decrease that hate prioritization. The decrease of AP consumption and reaction block rate are certainly nice attributes to add in as well. I think it's a really good TMR. If you get this from this character, I have no doubt you'll be using this as a stat stick in a majority of all of your builds. Now, for the job-based mission cards, this is one of the best things for strike units. They by far have the best rainbow versatility in the game because of it. You could make arguments for axe, spear, greatsword, glove, mace, all for what they bring for the bare bones of having like an AoE or unit res card and an agility card or some semblance of the two. The Sword Knight is getting there. They have 4 cards in common that are actually pretty nice from like an attack percent perspective for what it has to offer, but it's not any of the mainline AoE unit or agility ones, but there's enough in that category that I could see the future lining something up there too. But yeah, this is one of the best things about this cast of characters. Don't sleep on their ability to mingle, but I don't know if Kitone is one of those characters you would be throwing into a random party. She's not that same power level as Bridal Alaya, where you would just throw Alaya into any party and she's still going to dominate on her own. I don't think Kitone has that same, rainbow power or power level that Alaya does, so I don't think it's the same value, but it's still way above average for what most characters get for value. And for the general optimization, you do have a variety of weapons to choose from. I do think hers is the best one, though, with the strike res pen, with the decreased AP consumption, with the physical damage reduction. You could go for some of these others. The Tiger Fangs is nice for the AoE res. Lightweight Steel Fist is proven to be one of the best TMR accessories, where it's also got a ton of accuracy on it, which she needs. That maybe you go with a 3rd buff innately, or maybe you don't need the 3rd buff from a TMR. That I like that option too. The rest of these equips are pretty standard from what you'd ever expect on a unit like this. And the Esper is kind of the same idea. We've gone a little formulaic with the Espers at this point. You really can't go wrong with any of these 5, and the same for the TMRs. But the sample builds, this is where we get into just looking at some of the stats high level. From a mono dark perspective, and this is not my favorite recommended team, quite honestly. This is purely looking at it from a stat perspective. There's some flexibility vision card wise you could play with here. I threw in something here for Dex and Luck. Obviously, both those stats, really can't go wrong with. The slash res pen that's innate in this party because of Anima and because this vision card makes me like the Drain Rush ability a little bit more to chain with Sephiroth. I like the physical human killer on the Persona card too for her follow-up attack, which scales off that. The equips, I just went with the Alex ring, kept it simple here for the accuracy, the crit rate, the all element res. The Truststone set, which you'll see on the next couple sides as well, pretty standard here overall for right side, left side. The left side, I have sleep and stun res, but you could really put anything here for her. I don't think those are a must anymore, but getting into the stats, almost 10,000 HP here, 34 defense and 8 spirit, almost 1600 attack, definitely nice to see that, 120 agility. Unit res are okay, a little bit on the lower side. It's 20 unit res, 25 AoE res, and I say lower side because obviously we're in such a power creep stage that we're used to seeing characters with like mid 30s to 40s for either one of those stats. 20 reaction block, 75 acquired AP. Just jumping into modifiers, up to 73 dark attack and 42 human killer. She does have that 60 defense pen and the 20 strike res pen. 20% debuff weakening from her 140 upgrade, and then you do have a little bit of this 15% reduction of physical magic damage depending upon the size of the AoE and the health threshold and this and that. Overall, it's relatively okay. The accuracy, even with the Alex ring and the sub-slot vision card, 385, not great. Her buff will still add 30, and her 120 will still add another 30 on that. So, like, you can get to a respectable hit rate still, but there's also other things you could do. You could do the Odin vision card. You could go for aim instead of agility in the Truststone set. So that's not the ceiling for what she can hit there. But let's segue to a mono strike team. And again, there's still a lot of play here with the vision cards that you might pick. You could go with a variety of different main slots or sub-slot vision cards. You alternatively could go for the Bridal Alaya main slot vision card, which is another AoE type, but I think there's a pretty safe selection of vision cards. I didn't change anything else from an equipment perspective. The Esper's different here. I went with Odin instead of Dark Bahamut. And stat-wise, a little bit lower on the HP side, 9,300. Defense and spirit are the same. The attack, a slight step back here, down to 1,385. The agility is about the same. The accuracy definitely takes a big hit in this build, falling down a bit, losing out on the Alex ring and some of the vision card love, but a little bit of a bulkier unit here where I went, and I'm sorry, I have a misprint on the slide. I do not have Nightblade Master equipped as a passive. I went with the AoE res passive instead, trying to bulk up this Kitone a little bit more, so that's also why the accuracy number is a little bit lower, but in this build, using the AoE passive, 31 unit res, 39 AoE res, 60% reaction block, and 130% acquired AP. The modifiers end up being relatively somewhat similar. 25 dark attack, 35 strike attack, so it does kind of just like shuffle a little bit with 60 human killer this time, which is definitely a nice big increase for her follow-up attack as well, where, add up all those modifiers, still relatively close enough. A little more crit damage in this build. The penetrations are the same. You actually get more debuff weakening here because of the Summer Glacial Vision card, so up to 45% debuff weakening. Honestly, stat-wise, there's no like real drawbacks per se, other than maybe looking at that accuracy stat again. But she's not a crazy bulky unit. The attack and penetrations aren't popping off the charts, and so you talk about 30% healing. I don't think she should be blowing anybody off the map with that damage or healing back enough of it to really make up for some of the, on average, lower to mid unit and AoE resistance, where if you recall, she's got like no buffs in her kit for either one of those either, so you'll have to rely on like a Bridal Alaya buff to hit her or something to that effect. But the bottom line is, not a weak character, not an exceptional character, she's just pretty solid. And the Truststone recommendations, left side, I'm preferential to the defense and spirit to amplify that healing power of hers, where that seems to be a major part of her survivability. Might as well lean into it. The right side, I think agility is just fine. I mentioned the attack set bonus before and the defense penetration options. I think it's there. I just didn't write it out here, but I really do strongly believe in the agility. The 6 passives, I think you can go pretty generic here. I think these 6 are pretty okay. You could probably sub out the acquired AP and the dex here for something instead of long lines of crit rate and crit damage, maybe strike attack or dark attack where her weapon does not have strike attack on it. But I think these top 4, the attack percent, the def pen, the healing power, and the reaction block, think are pretty safe on all of your builds. But that's the review in a nutshell. Again, it's a very solid character. I'm sure a lot of people are going to use her for a variety of things. Can she add something to your strike team? Absolutely. That Dispel utility is a really nice thing. You know, the only other strike unit with a lot of Dispel access is Ed Elric, who we've seen kind of a drop-off in. And so, you know, it's just another unit to throw into the mix for what strike can bring. And as a 70 cost unit, does have some upside for cost limited content as well. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you later.